who gives whatever money, when, and what for. Absolutely. You have an unequivocal commitment from my campaign to do that. I honestly think Aubrey's a little careful. So thank you.
Was that for a rebuttal or just, was that for a rebuttal? Sassy recognized some elected officials, and since we started, the State Representative Gloria Bond has come in. And former City Commissioner Don Cooper over here. Final question before a break, and we'll start with Mr. Newman over here. Land is a precious resource that we should protect, preserve, and use wisely. What will each of you do to strike a reasonable balance between the preservation of lands to protect our natural heritage and opportunities that are critical to the economy of New Mexico? Mr. Newman.
There's a satellite view of the United States, the continental United States at night. It shows all the lights of the city across the continental United States. And what's amazing to me is how few lights there are west of the Mississippi and how many lights there are east of the Mississippi. I'm also reminded how many lights there are on the West Coast and how few lights there are in the heartland of America. And I would tell you that, first of all, I don't believe in government's acquisition of additional private lands, not without giving some public lands up to private use. I think we have to consider our natural resources. I think we have to preserve our history and our culture. But I would also want to mention, and I do this maybe a little with some trepidation in this, but the fact of the matter is, you look at the economy of the state of New Mexico, it's not very good. Our per capita income's horrible. We rank just about the bottom of every list you can rank at, rank at the top of every list that we don't want to rank at, and yet there's something we want to protect. And I think at the same time, we have to recognize the only way we lift people out of poverty is to grant them opportunity. And that's with great education, great jobs, and a great view of the future. We have wonderful lands here. I enjoy the mountains, I enjoy the plains, I enjoy the plateaus. 4 out of the 5 land masses that you can have in a state, we have in the state of New Mexico. 5th largest land mass, 2 million people. It seems like we have plenty of land, not enough people, and we need a solid economy. We want to preserve our culture, want to preserve our past, but not at the extension of our people. And I don't believe the federal government should be buying any additional land without giving up some federal lands for private use. Thank you.
In the late 80s and early 90s, I was a director of the National Association of Realtors and had an opportunity in Washington, D.C. to sit down with emissaries from Russia, believe it or not. And I thought it was fascinating. They wanted to know what could be done in their country to privatize their real estate. And as I sat there in that meeting, was talking to them, I thought it was interesting. They were trying to privatize. They were trying to bring it to the local level to individuals. And I feel like our country is trying to go the opposite direction. New Mexico is roughly 38% deeded land. There are no public lands in this state, ladies and gentlemen. There's federal lands and there's state lands. And if you want to know what you can do or what you can't do, I don't know that anybody in this room can walk up to the federal government and say, I want to go do this on that BLM tract, or I want to go do this on that forest lease tract. I don't think there's anybody in this room that can walk up to Pat Lyons and say, I want to go do this on that state lease tract. It's not there. We have plenty of lands that have been preserved for our cultural and heritage uses in this state. In fact, part of the problem, and I find it interesting that the Association of Counties hasn't addressed this, part of the problem that we have in this state is there's so many federal lands, and they, on average, pay 1/3 of what you and I pay in property taxes. Pilt. And that's when they pay. So we've got a problem in that issue in this state. One of the things that your congressman that I will do is I will work on that pilt payment, because it's wrong. It's wrong that they own some of the nicest real estate in this state, and yet they don't pay taxes on it, or they pay little or no taxes. We've got more than enough land that's been preserved. In fact, if you want a vibrant economy, you you want a strong New Mexico, we got to have real estate that people can buy, sell, and own. Thank you.
Talk about protecting our land. I'll tell you a little story. Going home one night about a year ago, I don't know if we live about 50 miles out of town, and part of it's dirt roads, and you go down those dirt roads, and there's owls that sit on those dirt roads looking for mice to cross. And I went home, I got up the next morning, and there was a pocket owl stuck in my radiator front, and it was still alive. And so Robin got it out and put it in a box, and she took it down to the zoo in Roswell, and they saw that and they said, "Oh no, you shouldn't have touched it." And she said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You should have left it stuck in the radiator until somebody from the conservation department could come out and pull it out, because it was a raptor, and you weren't supposed to touch it at all." And that's what's happened to the EPA and the problems we're having with their lands. They've just gone way overboard past common sense. I mean, it's just like Dr. Wiley and the fawn on the road. I mean, to throw a guy in jail for not telling you to pick up a fawn is kind of bad, I think. And so it's out of control. But we need to, some things we need to do. Otero Mesa, I think this question might kind of refer to that as a very sensitive area. I mean, but whenever we go into those sensitive areas, we've got to protect rights. And we need to protect the rights of the ranchers, and we need to protect the right of the oilmen. And we need to protect the right of the public that gets to use those lands. And so it's a hard balance we need to do, but I think right now probably EPA is way out of line on what they're restricting things they're doing. And so, but we still need to protect our lands. I'm not saying we should do that, but we need to back it up just a little. So thank you.
I'm for a smaller federal government. We are all environmentalists. We all care about our living conditions and where we live and how we live. We're not going to destroy our environment. I believe that the federal government has say over about 50% of New Mexico. Well, you know, if anyone is even a grade school reader of the Constitution, he's going to realize that that isn't in the Constitution, that property remain with the federal government. Now, it may be a real hard wrestling match to try and get that away from them. Texas has very little federal land. They have private property. They have what Texas wants. We could have what New Mexico wants also. I believe that we would have open ranges and access for recreation, but I believe that we would also have an incentive to drill, because we would be getting the majority of the funds coming out of the oil. It wouldn't be going to the federal government and then having them mail us a check. We would be collecting, as Earl mentioned, the PELT program. We would be collecting the full amount of taxes that should be put into those communities that have that land, because that's how they support their school system and their infrastructure. And in not allowing them to have that management of that property, we cut them out of that opportunity to fund their programs that they need. And that's why the counties are poor, that have a larger amount of federal land. I don't believe, in the Constitution it says 10 square mile area for the capital and military bases. Okay, here locally we have Holloman and we have White Sands. But beyond that, I don't think the federal government should have this property. I just don't feel that way. I think it should be something that's brought back to the local level and brought back to New Mexico. And a funny thing about that little chime right there, when I was at a debate last Thursday, I kept thinking, why are they stopping me? I couldn't hear the buzzer. I couldn't hear that high frequency.
We've owned and operated a ranch for the last 50 years in Lincoln County, and then we had one in Lee County, actually, where Monty was talking about that nuclear facility going in. I know what it means to a rancher when you talk about pride of stewardship. We pushed a lot of brush on our ranch over the years to improve the watershed, grazing capabilities, and I think that there's a lot that we've been able to do on private lands too that honestly the federal government has struggled with. I think I'm the only candidate up here that has United States Forest Service grazing permits. And I know the frustrations that we encounter when we work with the Forest Service in certain areas, whether it's dealing on Environmental Protection Agency issues, the northern goshawk and things like that. So there's a huge balancing act when we talk about stewardship of our lands and what we can and should be doing.